Mistress sent fake death certificate of pregnant wife Millionaire, married her the next day. Jonathan Davenport never believed in ghosts, but the moment he received a death certificate bearing his pregnant wife's name, he swore her spirit was haunting him. The paper shook in his hands, stamped and official-looking, proclaiming Evelyn Davenport dead at 30 weeks pregnant. Grief and disbelief coiled in his stomach, yet before the shock could settle, fate delivered an electrifying twist his mistress, Scarlett Morgan, urging a hasty marriage. Barely 24 hours later, Jonathan found himself at the altar, confused, shattered, but too entangled in lies to back out. Little did he know, this was the beginning of the greatest betrayal of his life. Jonathan Davenport was a man who appeared to have everything. Born in San Francisco into old money, he amplified his inheritance through shrewd real estate investments in emerging markets. By the age of 35, he was already being hailed as a property visionary, frequenting glossy magazine covers. Media outlets praised his altruism. He was known to cut six-figure checks to charity galas in one night and celebrated his marriage to the stunning Evelyn Montgomery, whom he met at an art exhibition in New York City. Evelyn, the only child of the illustrious Montgomery family, carried her own social pedigree. She exuded effortless charm and wisdom far more than her 29 years might suggest. Standing beside Jonathan at countless philanthropic events, she greeted ambassadors and CEOs with poise. Their wedding at a palatial Napa Valley estate became a media sensation. Pictures of their beaming faces graced tabloids and newspapers alike, the union portrayed as a fairy tale merger of two wealthy dynasties. Yet behind their carefully curated public image, Jonathan and Evelyn were humans susceptible to the storms of real life. They fought about business expansion, about Evelyn's philanthropic pursuits, and about starting a family. After 2 years of marriage, Evelyn's desire for motherhood grew while Jonathan's companies ballooned at an unrelenting pace. He traveled frequently, spanning continents to sign deals and chase profits, leaving her alone in their sprawling mansion. Their seemingly picture-perfect marriage began to show cracks. Jonathan was restless. The thrill of massive deals overshadowed the simpler joys of married life. The more he soared in his career, the further he drifted from Evelyn. She, in turn, sensed his emotional unavailability. The little resentments turned into fierce arguments and finally into an invisible wall that neither wanted to acknowledge openly. Amid that emotional distance, a new figure emerged on Jonathan's horizon, Scarlett Morgan, a sultry public relations consultant with big ambitions. Hired initially to elevate Jonathan's real estate brand to international stardom, she expertly found ways into his personal life. By the time Evelyn realized Jonathan was having an affair, it seemed that Scarlett was already entrenched in the hidden corners of their marriage. No one, including Jonathan, could have predicted how far Scarlett was willing to go to secure her place by his side. Scarlett Morgan was everything Evelyn was not. Where Evelyn exuded old money grace, Scarlett dripped modern allure. She dyed her raven hair a glossy black that contrasted sharply against her porcelain skin, wore designer suits that accentuated her figure, and talked with a confidence honed by her years in the cutthroat PR world. Born and raised in Los Angeles, she'd built a reputation for turning struggling brands into media sensations, often by any means necessary. When Jonathan first laid eyes on Scarlett, he noticed her sharp intelligence and unwavering self-assurance. She pitched a marketing campaign to expand his real estate empire into Europe and Asia. Not only did she present trend forecasts and financial analytics with breathtaking clarity, but she also had a flair for showmanship that mesmerized him. She spoke in a smoky, calm voice, leaning forward just enough to suggest both command and temptation. Jonathan found himself listening intently to her every word, enthralled by more than just her marketing strategy. He convinced himself that hiring Scarlett was good for business. Gradually, dinners about public relations strategy extended into late nights with expensive wine. Scarlett complimented him lavishly, praising his achievements as if they were feats of genius. Over time, her flattery became an intoxicant Jonathan craved. Lonely from his frequent travels and distanced from Evelyn, he rationalized that Scarlett understood his ambitions in a way his wife did not. Evelyn sensed the shift in Jonathan's demeanor, more distant phone calls, quick excuses not to attend family events, and the subtle scent of unfamiliar perfume on his suits. When she confronted him, Jonathan parried with half-truths and diversions. She never received a direct confession, but the emotional wedge between them grew glaringly. Behind the scenes, Scarlett fanned Jonathan's ego and fueled his resentment toward his wife. What Evelyn couldn't suspect was the full extent of Scarlett's ambitions. The mistress wasn't content with merely being a side piece in a millionaire's life. She wanted his name, his ring, and his fortune. Step by step, Scarlett imagined a strategy to eliminate Evelyn from the picture entirely. All she needed was the perfect moment to strike, and that moment would soon arrive when Evelyn announced she was pregnant. Evelyn had always longed to be a mother. Growing up in her parents' grand home, she spent her childhood enchanted by the warmth of a loving family dynamic. She dreamed of creating that same environment someday, and after her third wedding anniversary, she was more than ready to start a family with Jonathan. Their arguments about timing always ended inconclusively, but Evelyn hoped that once the baby arrived, Jonathan's paternal instincts might flourish, pulling them back together. When the pregnancy test turned positive, Evelyn felt an ecstatic rush. She imagined tiny footsteps running down the mansion's marble halls, laughter echoing in sunlit rooms. She tried to call Jonathan, who was overseas in Paris closing $1 billion development project, but he didn't pick up. Undeterred, she left a sweetly tearful voice message. "Darling, it's me. I have news you'll want to hear. Call me back as soon as you can, okay? I love you." The next morning, Jonathan finally answered. His reaction was subdued, less jubilant than Evelyn had hoped. She attributed it to his fatigue from back-to-back meetings. As the weeks progressed, her belly began to show a gentle curve, and she busied herself redecorating the guest wing into a nursery. Every ultrasound appointment brought a new wave of excitement. She chose pastel blues and yellows, not wanting to prematurely lock in a color scheme until they knew the baby's gender. She invited Jonathan to the 12-week scan, where they would first hear the baby's heartbeat together. He showed up late, sliding into the darkened ultrasound room, just as the whooshing sound of the baby's heartbeat reverberated through the speakers. Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears of joy. Jonathan managed a forced smile. Beneath that surface, he felt cornered. He thought about how the child would anchor him to a life he found increasingly suffocating. Scarlett, for her part, was enraged when she discovered Evelyn was pregnant. She had envisioned eventually luring Jonathan away from his wife, securing his fortune, and living a life of glamorous power. Evelyn's pregnancy threatened to seal Jonathan's loyalty to his wife. In Scarlett's mind, if Evelyn gave birth to Jonathan's heir, the mistress would become a permanent afterthought. Scarlett resolved she would never let that happen. Weeks passed, and Scarlett seethed. Every text, every whispered phone call from Jonathan about this pregnancy pricked her like needles. She realized that while Jonathan might still be enthralled by her physical allure, his sense of duty to his unborn child could ultimately outweigh his passion for her. So she devised a dangerous plan, one that hovered between cunning manipulation and outright crime. It began with subtle seeds of doubt. Whenever Jonathan complained about Evelyn's insistence on restyling the house or her emotional swings, Scarlett sympathized in hushed, empathic tones. "She's trapping you," she cooed. "Using the baby to make you stay. Are you sure this is what you want, Jonathan?" She raised rhetorical questions about whether Jonathan's marriage would remain intact if he continued spending time away from home. Gradually, her manipulations escalated. Scarlett's real break, however, came when she discovered a private detective, George Eastman, who had once handled forgery cases for corporate clients in Los Angeles. Rumor had it, Eastman was adept at acquiring official-looking documents, fake passports, fabricated medical records, and, crucially, forged death certificates. All it took was Scarlett's willingness to pay a small fortune under the table to hire his clandestine services. She reasoned that if she somehow convinced Jonathan that Evelyn had died, especially in a faraway place or an unexpected manner, he might be grief-stricken enough to make rash decisions. Specifically, decisions like marrying Scarlett in a moment of vulnerability. The hardest part was orchestrating a plausible reason for Evelyn's apparent death. Scarlett deliberated for weeks on how to manipulate the timing. Then she stumbled on the perfect piece of serendipity. Evelyn had a rare complication in her pregnancy called placenta previa, which occasionally required specialized treatment. Scarlett acquired details of Evelyn's condition by hacking into Jonathan's personal email, discovering messages between Evelyn and her OB-GYN, Dr. Alicia Brooks, at Redwood Hospital. Using that knowledge, Scarlett arranged for Eastman to create an official-looking death certificate that claimed Evelyn had died due to severe complications from placenta previa in an out-of-state clinic. She chose a remote facility in Montana, somewhere neither Jonathan nor Evelyn had ever stepped foot. The logic was that a clinic in a secluded area might have fewer resources to refute the claims immediately. Scarlett planned to present this certificate at the precise moment Jonathan's confusion and heartbreak were at a climax, ensuring that he believed no reason existed to doubt Evelyn's supposed death. Even the most intricate deceptions often leave footprints. While Scarlett was methodical in her approach, she wasn't perfect. A few subtle clues emerged in her path, tiny red flags that might have been enough to derail her scheme had anyone been paying closer attention. Unfortunately, Jonathan was too wrapped up in business expansions and personal confusion to see them. First, Scarlett requested unusual background checks from George Eastman, whose reputation as a problem solver hadn't gone unnoticed by certain corporate circles. Samuel Irving, Jonathan's longtime friend and business partner, heard rumors that Scarlett was seeking someone with a knack for forging documents. Concerned about corporate espionage, Samuel pressed Jonathan, "Why does your PR consultant need a forger?" Jonathan shrugged off the question, attributing it to Scarlett's unorthodox PR methods. Perhaps she was planning a sensational PR stunt or investigating potential brand copycats. Samuel remained uneasy, but had too many other financial matters on his plate to delve deeper. Second, Scarlett had called Redwood Hospital multiple times, posing as Evelyn to request copies of medical files, presumably to gather details that would make the fake death certificate realistic. Dr. Alicia Brooks, overseeing Evelyn's prenatal care, found it odd that Evelyn asked repetitive questions about medical complications. Evelyn, during her real visits, never inquired so specifically. However, in a busy hospital environment, such discrepancies often slip through the cracks. Lastly, Evelyn sensed an odd tension whenever Scarlett was around. Though Evelyn was unaware of the mistress's identity, she felt a palpable chill in the air, like a gathering storm. She caught glimpses of Scarlett in the building where Jonathan's offices were located, overheard her name in hushed phone calls, and once found an earring that didn't belong to her in Jonathan's car. Yet Evelyn, 3 months pregnant and determined to maintain her family, tried to push aside any dark suspicions. She attributed her worries to hormonal changes and the stress of the pregnancy. If any of these threads had been pulled firmly enough, Scarlett's carefully woven plan might have unraveled. But the perfect storm was brewing: Jonathan's emotional distance, Evelyn's vulnerability, and Scarlett's relentless cunning merged into a scenario ripe for unimaginable betrayal. The morning it all came crashing down began like any other. Evelyn, now in her 18th week, woke early to mild nausea and padded across the hardwood floors to her kitchen for a cup of peppermint tea. She planned to spend the day finalizing the baby's room decor. Jonathan had left town again for negotiations in Seattle. Over the phone, he told her he'd be back in a few days. Though these frequent separations weighed on her, Evelyn clung to hope for a happier future once the baby arrived. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Jonathan sat in a swanky boardroom overlooking Seattle's skyline. His phone buzzed. The text message read, "You are GENTCALL me immediately." The number was unknown, but he felt a jolt of alarm. Stepping away from the meeting, he dialed. Scarlett's shaky voice answered. "Jonathan." She sounded breathless, on the verge of tears. "Something terrible has happened. I don't even know how to say this." His chest tightened. "Scarlett, what's going on? Why are you calling from a strange number?" "There's been an accident," Scarlett managed, voice cracking convincingly. "I got a call from a clinic in Montana. They said Evelyn went there to see a specialist. But she didn't make it. They said she suffered a massive hemorrhage." Jonathan, the first so sorry. For a moment, the world around him ceased. He felt a sharp pounding in his ears. "That's impossible. Evelyn isn't in Montana. She's at home, in San Francisco." Even as he spoke, a chill of dread curled in his gut. Scarlett sighed dramatically, swallowing a sob. "I have an official death certificate. They somehow sent it to me because they found my name on your business's emergency contact forms. I swear I didn't know. I'm so sorry." Panicked confusion gripped Jonathan. "Send me the document. I need to see it." Within minutes, a PDF arrived in his inbox, complete with official stamps and a cause of death referencing placenta previa complications. In the swirl of disbelief and heartbreak, Jonathan's rational mind barely had time to question why Evelyn would be in Montana. He stared at the certificate, the official language practically shouting that his pregnant wife was gone. He sank into a chair, numb. Scarlett had delivered her brutal masterpiece. Jonathan felt as though he'd slipped into an alternate reality. As soon as the call with Scarlett ended, he tried calling Evelyn's phone repeatedly. No answer. In truth, Evelyn was out shopping for nursery linens, her phone buried in her handbag on silent mode, unreachable. Jonathan then called Redwood Hospital in a panic, only to learn that Evelyn wasn't scheduled for any appointments that day. The staff, bound by privacy laws, offered him no clear answers. Confusion twisted into anxiety, and in those frantic hours, Jonathan's sanity wavered. He crumpled the printed copy of the death certificate in his hand, mind racing with contradictory thoughts. Why would Evelyn be in Montana without telling me? Could she have kept something so serious hidden? Guilt gnawed at him. He recalled their arguments about his constant travel, his lack of emotional support, and her pleas for him to be more involved. Could she have sought a specialist on her own, fearing his disapproval? Scarlett continued to feed him partial truths over tearful phone calls. She claimed the clinic had said Evelyn arrived in dire condition due to complications. To sell her story further, she mentioned speaking to a nurse at the clinic who confirmed the tragedy. In actuality, Scarlett had bribed a friend from her PR network, Lucy Fowler, to pose as a nurse for any phone verification Jonathan might attempt. After hours of fruitless phone calls, Jonathan broke down in his hotel room. He called his assistant, ordering a private jet to Montana, but Scarlett intervened swiftly, suggesting that the body was already en route to be transported for an autopsy. Her story changed minute by minute, each lie layered with just enough detail to paralyze Jonathan's ability to think clearly. Exhausted, heartbroken, and riddled with guilt, he sank into despair. Miles away, completely unaware, Evelyn was humming softly as she arranged color swatches in the future nursery. She had no idea that her husband believed her to be dead or that the greatest betrayal of their marriage was unfolding at that very moment. Scarlett's cunning extended beyond forging a single document. She understood that if Jonathan traveled to Montana, her entire ploy would unravel. So she convinced him that due to the severity of the complications, the alleged clinic had already transferred Evelyn's remains to a private mortuary for immediate embalming, citing health regulations. She provided him the address of a non-existent funeral home, complete with a website that George Eastman's associates had hurriedly created. Phone numbers rang directly to Lucy Fowler, who played the role of a sympathetic funeral director. In his grief and guilt, Jonathan clung to Scarlett's every word. He craved any semblance of support, even from the woman who had been his secret lover. Reluctantly, he agreed not to fly to Montana just yet, telling himself he would wait until the body was returned to San Francisco. Scarlett, aware that any physical body would be proof of her lie, urged him to wait for the final medical clearances. Meanwhile, Jonathan was inundated by messages from business associates, family, and friends who had no clue about the tragedy he believed he was facing. He debated whether to announce Evelyn's passing publicly. Scarlett, anticipating this, told him, "Please, Jonathan, for the sake of Evelyn's privacy, let's keep this discreet until the arrangements are finalized." Through carefully planted seeds of manipulation, she orchestrated a bubble of secrecy around him. Evelyn noticed Jonathan's uncharacteristic silence. She tried calling him, leaving voicemails that went unanswered. Confused but preoccupied with her own doctor's visits, she resolved to speak with him once he returned from Seattle. She had no reason to believe her husband could be mourning her non-existent death hundreds of miles away. As the days slipped by, Jonathan hovered in limbo, waiting for the moment he'd be told he could finally lay his wife and unborn child to rest. But Scarlett never intended to produce a funeral. She was simply stalling until she could execute the next phase of her twisted plan, steering Jonathan into her arms permanently. With each passing day, Jonathan's desperation soared. The guilt was a constant presence, gnawing at him in the quiet hours. He pictured Evelyn's face, her delicate features softened by pregnancy, the gentle optimism in her eyes. Memories of their first dance at their wedding replayed in his mind, taunting him with the idea that he should have been a better husband, should have spent more time with her. She had died alone, according to Scarlett's story, surrounded by strangers in a remote clinic. Scarlett used his vulnerable state to her advantage. She became the indispensable caretaker, bringing him meals he barely touched, offering him comfort in hushed, intimate moments. Jonathan's emotional walls were collapsing, and Scarlett's presence became a twisted form of solace. She never missed an opportunity to underscore how devastating this was for them both. In a moment of weakness, Jonathan confided, "I've lost everything. Scarlett, my wife, my child. What's left for me?" She seized that moment. "I'm here," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know this is terrible, but we can get through it together. Let me help you." He wept in her arms, broken. The following morning, he woke with a heavy numbness. His phone still showed no calls from Evelyn's number. He felt that was the final confirmation of her demise. Had she been alive, surely she would have tried to contact him by now. Scarlett quietly introduced another idea. "You shouldn't be alone, Jonathan. You need to find a way to move forward. Maybe the two of us, maybe we can start fresh. I know it sounds soon, but life is short. This tragedy proves that." The notion was jarring, yet Jonathan was too shattered to fully grasp how manipulative it was. The mistress he'd been seeing in secret was now offering him the promise of a new life, the possibility of redemption from guilt. Though a part of him recoiled at the idea, another part, starved for any emotional lifeline, clung to it. He had no inkling that Scarlett planned to push him into marriage while his mind was still blurred by his alleged loss. While Jonathan drowned in sorrow, Evelyn began to notice unusual disturbances. She received a condolence email from a distant acquaintance referencing her tragic passing. At first, she dismissed it as an odd miscommunication or a spam message. But within 2 days, she got another one, this time from a charity organization she'd donated to in the past, offering regrets about the news of her demise. Alarm bells rang in her head. She wrote back immediately, demanding to know where they had heard such nonsense. The charity responded vaguely, mentioning rumors floating around social circles that she had died in Montana. Alarmed, Evelyn tried calling Jonathan. Again, no response. She left voicemails asking, "What is going on, Jonathan? People are saying the craziest things. Call me back, please." She reached out to her parents, who were on a cruise and had no knowledge of any such rumors. Worried sick, she contacted Redwood Hospital's doctor, Alicia Brooks, who was equally stunned to hear about the bizarre gossip. Evelyn asked if there was any chance her medical files had been compromised. Dr. Brooks could not confirm or deny that, but assured her they took patient confidentiality seriously. Increasingly frantic, Evelyn decided to pay a surprise visit to Jonathan's office. She was met by his assistant, who wore an expression of pure shock upon seeing her. "Miss S. Davenport. You're here," the assistant stammered. "Mr. Davenport. He's not in right now." The assistant's eyes were wide, as though seeing a ghost. Suspicion flared in Evelyn. Was Jonathan telling people she was dead? But why would he do that? She pressed the assistant for Jonathan's whereabouts, only to learn he was at a private property 2 hours away, supposedly handling a secretive business matter. With dread clenching her heart, Evelyn packed a bag and set off to confront her husband directly. She needed answers. Little did she know, Scarlett was orchestrating a wedding ceremony at that very property, a wedding intended to unite Jonathan and herself, based on the vile lie that Evelyn was no longer among the living. The private retreat sat on a lush mountainside, overlooking a tranquil lake. Jonathan had purchased this estate years prior, with the idea of turning it into a luxury retreat center, but it had remained an exclusive hideaway for him and a select few. Now, Scarlett had transformed it into a stage for her final coup. She had convinced Jonathan to hold a small, private ceremony there, a way to honor Evelyn's memory and to symbolize the start of a new chapter, she claimed. In his grief-addled mind, Jonathan rationalized that this clandestine wedding might be an impulsive step, but maybe it was a step toward healing. He was emotionally drained, disoriented, and searching for something tangible to hold on to. Scarlett bombarded him with sentiments like, "Evelyn would want you to be happy," fueling a twisted justification for their union. Scarlett had arranged a justice of the peace she had found through dubious means, someone willing to conduct a discreet ceremony for a hefty fee, no questions asked. There were flowers, a small cake, and a few fake guests that Scarlett said were close friends who wanted to support them. In reality, they were actors paid to legitimize the event. Minutes before the ceremony, Jonathan paced restlessly on the veranda, staring at the sunlit lake. His heart felt hollow. He still wrestled with the fact that Evelyn was supposedly gone. Waves of regret for his affair and for not being there during her final moments consumed him. Every fiber of his being whispered that this wedding was wrong. But he had convinced himself that he had lost everything and that Scarlett was the only emotional anchor left. When Scarlett emerged in a simple white dress, Jonathan felt an odd pang of revulsion mixed with desperate gratitude. He couldn't fully articulate it, but a part of him recognized the profound betrayal. Yet he was in too deep. The officiant began speaking, and Jonathan stood there, numb, as he repeated vows he could barely recall. In that horrifying instant, a swirl of emotions, grief, Guilt, confusion, and utter despair converged, culminating in the moment he pronounced Scarlett Morgan as his wife. It was all part of Scarlett's sinister script, carefully timed to unfold before Evelyn could possibly arrive to disrupt the charade. Evelyn's drive to the mountainside estate was fraught with tension. The road wound through dense forest, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across her windshield. Adrenaline surged in her veins, the baby moving anxiously within her womb as if sensing her distress. By the time she pulled up to the wrought iron gates, her hands were shaking. She had no idea what to expect, only that she had to find Jonathan and demand the truth. She followed the gravel path until she reached a spacious clearing flanked by manicured lawns and flower arrangements. Her eyes caught sight of unfamiliar cars, parked haphazardly, as if for an event. Confusion creased her brow. What event would Jonathan be hosting here, and why wasn't she told? She exited her car and marched toward the large wooden doors, which stood ajar. The muffled sound of voices drifted from within. Then she heard it, the voice of a man, solemn and grave, speaking words that sounded like vows. Her heart slammed in her chest. Without hesitation, Evelyn pushed open the doors to find a small gathering in the estate's grand living room. At the center stood Jonathan, pale-faced in a suit, and Scarlett, radiant in a white dress. A hush fell over the room as every head turned toward the entrance, eyes widening in collective disbelief. I'm sorry, what? Evelyn stammered, taking in the scene. The officiant held a small book of vows, his expression a portrait of confusion. Scarlett's face went ashen, her mouth dropping open. For a split second, even she looked genuinely stunned, as though witnessing the reappearance of a ghost. Jonathan's eyes locked onto Evelyn's belly, visibly round with pregnancy, a living testament to the child he believed was gone. Silence stretched, a suffocating pause in which reality caved in on itself. Evelyn, the supposedly dead wife, stood breathing and very much alive in front of the man who had just uttered vows to another woman. An eruption of chaos followed. The paid actors, uncertain of their next move, exchanged panicked glances. The officiant hastily snapped his book shut, muttering something about needing clarification. Scarlett, struggling to maintain composure, forced a tremulous smile and tried to take Jonathan's arm. He pulled away, eyes never leaving Evelyn. Evelyn, trembling with shock and hurt, finally found her voice. "Jonathan, what is this?" she demanded, tears welling in her eyes. She looked at Scarlett in her wedding dress, then back at Jonathan. "And why on earth are people saying, 'I'm dead'?" Jonathan, still stupefied, blurted out fragments of the story he had been led to believe. "I got this call, a death certificate, placenta previa." His voice cracked. "They told me you died in Montana." Evelyn's face went from confusion to horror. "Who told you that? I've never been to Montana. Jonathan, I'm fine. The baby is fine." She glanced around the room, uncertain which faces were friends and which were strangers. In that moment, the tenuous threads of Scarlett's deception began to unravel at breakneck speed. She tried to defend herself, speaking in rushed sentences. "Jonathan, the first only told you what the clinic told me. This is all a misunderstanding." Maybe it was someone impersonating Evelyn, or maybe it was an identity mix-up. Jonathan's gaze turned icy. The veil of grief lifted, replaced by fury and betrayal. He realized just how little sense Scarlett's story made now that Evelyn stood alive before him. The officiant quietly retreated toward the door, eager to avoid any legal entanglement. The hired guests, uncertain whether to maintain their ruse, inched away. The entire moment crackled with tension. Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears. "Jonathan, did you really think I was dead? And then you married her?" Her voice trembled with heartbreak. She pressed her hand protectively over her abdomen, as if shielding the baby from the cruel spectacle. Scarlett's expression contorted from panic to anger. She recognized that her plan had collapsed in spectacular fashion. But she wasn't one to bow out quietly. Deep within her, a stubborn resolve ignited. She would fight to keep the upper hand, no matter the cost. Scarlett's survival instincts roared to life. She tried to spin a quick lie. "I swear, Jonathan, I was just doing what I thought you wanted. You've been so lost, so vulnerable. I had to protect you." Her eyes darted around for an exit, but all she saw was a ring of suspicious stares. Evelyn felt a surge of anger course through her. Protect him from what? From his pregnant wife? She looked at Jonathan, voice wavering between fury and heartbreak. "You thought I was dead. For how long, Jonathan? And you never questioned it." Jonathan swallowed hard. "Scarlett showed me documents, Evelyn. I can't explain it. I tried to verify, but there were phone calls from a mortuary, a nurse." His words trailed off as he realized just how gullible he had been. A wave of shame washed over him. Evelyn turned back to Scarlett. "Why?" she asked, tears glittering in her eyes. "Was this about money? Or was this your way of getting him to forget me entirely?" Scarlett bristled, the corners of her mouth curving into a snarl. "You think you're so perfect, Evelyn. You never had time for him when he was away on business. You never understood his ambition the way I do. All you did was chain him with a child he didn't want." Jonathan blanched, but his stare remained fixed on Scarlett. "Stop, right now." His voice carried a terrifying edge. "I loved my child. I love my child. What you did is monstrous." Realizing that no more lies could salvage the situation, Scarlett shrugged off pretense. "You can judge me all you want, but you came to me in the first place, Jonathan. You wanted out. Some part of you wanted a different life. Don't pretend otherwise." Anger sparked in Evelyn's eyes. She stepped closer to Scarlett. "Get out," she hissed, each word a dagger of indignation. "Get out of my husband's property. Get out of our lives. If you dare come near us again." She couldn't finish. The emotional toll was too great. For a moment, Scarlett's eyes glistened, as if she might burst into tears. But instead, she laughed a chilling, bitter sound. Then she pulled off the ring she had slipped on moments ago and tossed it at Jonathan's feet. Without another word, she stormed out of the estate, slamming the door so hard the walls seemed to shake. When Scarlett's footsteps faded, the estate fell into an uncanny silence. The paid actors had fled. The officiant had quietly disappeared into the night. Only Jonathan and Evelyn remained, facing each other in the large, elegantly furnished living room, as if castaways on a deserted island. Tension thickened the air. Evelyn stared at Jonathan with tear-filled eyes, her hand still pressed against her belly. "I can't believe you," she whispered, choking back sobs. "You were going to marry her the day after you thought I died." Jonathan, riddled with shame, sank into a nearby chair. "I don't know how to explain it," he said shakily. "She planted all these seeds of doubt. She gave me this forged death certificate, phone calls, everything seemed official. Evelyn, you have to believe me. I was in shock. I felt so guilty. And Scarlett was there, feeding me these lies." Evelyn stood rigidly. "Why didn't you at least call my parents, my friends, my doctor, or come to the house to see for yourself? How did you jump straight to planning a wedding with another woman?" He lowered his gaze, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I tried calling you. You never picked up. Then she said your body was transferred out of Montana. It was all happening so fast. I was a fool. I'm so sorry." The magnitude of his betrayal hung in the space between them. Evelyn's anger and heartbreak collided. She sank onto a sofa, weeping uncontrollably. She thought of the baby inside her, the innocent life that was supposed to be the bridge to a renewed love. Instead, It felt like her world had collapsed. Part of her wanted to run away and never look back, while another part, a gentler, hopeful part, needed answers, closure, maybe even reconciliation. Jonathan rose, approached her carefully, and knelt beside her. "Evelyn, please, I'm sorry for everything, the affair, believing Scarlett, all of it. I don't know how to make it up to you, but I'll do anything." She looked down at him, her tears staining her cheeks. She didn't know whether to scream or to forgive. All she knew was that their marriage and the future of their child now hung in a precarious balance, hinged on what they would choose next. The rest of that evening, Evelyn and Jonathan labored through anguished discussions, tears, and partial attempts at understanding. By midnight, Evelyn felt drained, physically and emotionally. She agreed to stay at the estate for the night, but refused to share a bedroom with Jonathan. She needed space and time. At dawn, Jonathan made phone calls to clarify the fiasco. He confronted the contact details Scarlett had given him for the mortuary, only to find the number was disconnected. The website vanished, leading to an error page. The alleged clinic in Montana had no record of an Evelyn Davenport. Slowly, the entire mosaic of deception came into sharp relief, leaving him more furious at his own gullibility than he could articulate. Evelyn, meanwhile, called her OB-GYN, Dr. Alicia Brooks, who assured her there was no reason to travel out of state for her condition. Redwood Hospital had everything covered. Doctor Brooks also expressed concern about the repeated attempts someone had made to access Evelyn's medical records. Evelyn felt a chill realizing just how deep Scarlett's infiltration went. While Jonathan and Evelyn pieced together the timeline, they discovered unsettling details. Jonathan found receipts for payments made to a G. Eastman from one of Scarlett's business accounts. After some investigation, they linked the name to George Eastman, a known forger in corporate circles. It dawned on Jonathan that Scarlett had orchestrated a labyrinth of fakery, phone calls, documents, websites, an entire parallel reality crafted to manipulate his grief. Evelyn wept anew, grappling with the horrifying truth that her own husband had fallen under Scarlett's sway. Jonathan, for his part, felt a surge of righteous anger blossoming in his chest. He wanted vengeance. He wanted to expose Scarlett's criminal acts, to ensure she never had the chance to ensnare anyone else. Yet he also recognized the damage to his marriage might be irreparable. This ordeal was not just an isolated crime. It was a culmination of months of betrayal, lies, and emotional neglect. Evelyn was alive, but their relationship lay on life support. Whether it could be saved depended on what they did next. Within days, Jonathan hired a top-tier legal team to unravel the mess Scarlett had created. Led by the fierce attorney Linda Prescott, the team meticulously gathered evidence of fraud, identity theft, and forgery. They contacted the county clerk's office, where Scarlett had tried to file the marriage certificate. Fortunately, the county official had flagged inconsistencies in the paperwork, and it was never fully processed. Evelyn, reluctant yet resolute, participated in documenting how Scarlett impersonated her to gather medical details. Dr. Alicia Brooks provided statements about suspicious phone inquiries. Even Redwood Hospital's department discovered logs showing multiple failed attempts to access Evelyn's records. Linda Prescott was confident they could press criminal charges against Scarlett and her accomplices, including George Eastman. But the legal complexities didn't end there. Jonathan's name was on a near-filed marriage certificate with Scarlett, raising questions about bigamy and the validity of that unconsummated union. Though the paperwork was incomplete, rumors began to seep into the gossip columns, tarnishing Jonathan's reputation. Business partners questioned his judgment, and philanthropic boards quietly distanced themselves. The scenario threatened to topple the empire he had meticulously built. Amid this chaos, Evelyn contemplated whether she should separate from Jonathan. Her heartbreak lingered, but a new, practical fear emerged. The potential scandal might harm the baby's future. She wrestled with conflicting emotions: love, betrayal, anger, and a maternal instinct to protect her child. Jonathan pleaded for forgiveness, acknowledging that his actions were deplorable. Though he had been manipulated, he'd also knowingly stepped outside his marriage before that. He promised Evelyn that he would cut ties with Scarlett entirely and do whatever it took to make amends. Whether she believed him or not was uncertain, but she recognized that pressing charges against Scarlett could become a grueling legal battle. Perhaps having Jonathan's resources and influence on her side would be an asset in safeguarding her and her unborn child. Together, they decided to pursue the lawsuit, a choice that set in motion a dramatic confrontation with Scarlett and her associates. Scarlett Morgan didn't vanish quietly. When the first lawsuit papers arrived, she refused to accept blame. In a bold move, she countered with allegations of her own, claiming Jonathan had coerced her into forging documents and had orchestrated the fake death certificate to conceal financial scams. She twisted the narrative, painting herself as a victim who had been following Jonathan's instructions to protect his massive real estate empire from a vengeful wife. The tabloids lapped up the scandal. Headlines screamed about a death certificate conspiracy, portraying the love triangle as a sensational meltdown among the ultra-rich. Paparazzi camped outside Jonathan and Evelyn's mansion. They trailed Evelyn to her prenatal appointments, snapping photos of her visibly pregnant form. A swirl of speculation, rumor, and half-truths flooded social media. Some believed Scarlett's version, labeling Evelyn a cunning gold digger who staged her own death scare for publicity. Others sided with Evelyn, sympathizing with the pregnant woman whose husband nearly married his mistress. Jonathan's business associates went into crisis management mode, severing certain partnerships to limit damage. Stock values for Davenport Holdings wobbled as investors read damning headlines. Linda Prescott, unwavering, maintained that the mountain of evidence against Scarlett was insurmountable, including the documented transaction to George Eastman, the phone call logs, and the forged certificate. But Scarlett's PR savvy turned her into a media darling. For a spell, she gave carefully orchestrated interviews, shedding crocodile tears over how Jonathan had ruined her life. Amid the storm, Evelyn retreated to her parents' home for emotional support. Her mother insisted she rest, cautioning her about stress's effect on pregnancy. Jonathan visited daily, trying to assure Evelyn that they would prevail in court, that their marriage could recover. Her father, Robert Montgomery, was less forgiving, glowering at Jonathan, insisting he'd never allow his daughter and grandchild to endure further harm. As the court date loomed, tensions soared. Everyone wondered if Evelyn and Jonathan's fragile truce would hold under the relentless public scrutiny, or if Scarlett's brazen counterattack would shatter what was left of their marriage. Court proceedings began under intense media glare. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but journalists and fans of salacious gossip thronged the courthouse steps. Evelyn, wearing a simple black dress that did little to hide her growing belly, arrived escorted by her parents and Linda Prescott. Jonathan followed closely behind, straining to offer a reassuring smile. Scarlett made a grand entrance, wearing a crisp white suit, a quiet smirk playing on her lips. On the stand, Jonathan recounted how Scarlett first brought him the false news of Evelyn's death. The prosecution presented phone records, emails, bank transfers, and a digital trail that led back to Scarlett and George Eastman. Their star witness was Lucy Fowler, who confessed to posing as a mortuary director and a clinic nurse at Scarlett's behest. Lucy claimed she had been promised a substantial sum of money for her role, though she said she never imagined the deception would escalate this far. Scarlett's defense tried to paint Jonathan as the mastermind, suggesting he had grown tired of his marriage and wanted to orchestrate Evelyn's death to free himself. Their arguments highlighted Jonathan's affair with Scarlett, his willingness to believe Evelyn was dead without verification, and the suspicious fact that a wedding was arranged so quickly. They aimed to sow reasonable doubt, insinuating that Scarlett might have been an unwitting pawn. Evelyn took the stand on the final day of testimony, her voice trembling with emotion. She spoke of her confusion when she discovered rumors of her own death, her heartbreak upon finding her husband at a wedding ceremony with another woman, and the stress this ordeal inflicted on her pregnancy. The sincerity of her testimony resonated deeply in the courtroom, leaving little doubt that she was a victim of extraordinary malice. By the time closing arguments wrapped up, the weight of evidence leaning against Scarlett seemed overwhelming. Yet, no one dared to underestimate her cunning. If the jury found even the smallest flicker of plausibility in her defense, the outcome could shift. Evelyn, teetering between hope and anxiety, prayed for a verdict that would grant her some measure of justice. The jury deliberated for 2 days. During that tense interlude, the entire cast of players held their breath. Evelyn spent the time at her parents' home, her legs propped up to combat swelling, tears frequently forming in her eyes as she relived the ordeal. Jonathan tried to offer words of comfort, but she was distant, uncertain if she could fully forgive him. Meanwhile, Scarlett hid away in a luxury condo, rumored to be paid for by a new benefactor, someone enthralled by her twisted celebrity. On the morning of the verdict, the courtroom thrummed with anticipation. The judge read the jury's decision. Scarlett Morgan was found guilty of fraud, conspiracy to commit forgery, and identity theft. George Eastman, who had cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence, also faced punishment for his role in the elaborate scheme. The marriage certificate Scarlett attempted to file was declared null and void, having never been legitimate in the first place. The judge, unsparing in his words, condemned the brazen and calculated cruelty of Scarlett's acts. She was sentenced to a prison term that would see her behind bars for several years. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom, but Scarlett remained stoic, her only reaction an icy glare in Jonathan and Evelyn's direction. As she was led away in handcuffs, her final glance was one of venomous resentment. For Jonathan and Evelyn, the verdict was a bittersweet relief. Justice had been served, but their relationship bore deep scars. Outside the courthouse, paparazzi clamored for statements. Jonathan declined comment, while Evelyn simply said, "All I want now is peace for me and my baby." The public largely sided with Evelyn after the trial, though some tabloids still peddled scandalous spins. Davenport Holdings saw a gradual rebound in its market value, thanks to Linda Prescott's adept crisis management and the public's sympathy for Evelyn's plight. Yet for the couple at the heart of the storm, the biggest question remained: could their marriage survive everything that had happened? In the months following Scarlett's conviction, life slowly settled into a new normal. Jonathan chose to step back from some of his business obligations, focusing instead on counseling sessions he attended with Evelyn. Their couple's therapist, Dr. Marisol Andrade, urged them to confront the root issues: betrayal, lack of communication, and Jonathan's affair. Progress came in small steps. Evelyn was guarded, her trust shattered. At times, she lashed out, recalling the day she discovered Jonathan at the altar with another woman. Other days she softened, acknowledging that Jonathan had himself been manipulated on a grand scale. Jonathan admitted his wrongdoing, both in having an affair and in failing to verify the news of Evelyn's death. He recognized that his emotional detachment had left a vacuum Scarlett easily exploited. Time and therapy brought some healing. The looming arrival of their child acted as a catalyst for hope. Every ultrasound appointment, every hiccup of the growing baby reminded them of the future they once dreamed of. Jonathan watched with awe and remorse as Evelyn's belly expanded. He promised to be present, to attend every LeMay's class, to be the husband he hadn't been before. By the 8th month of pregnancy, they'd found a tentative equilibrium. The media fervor had quieted, and the tabloids moved on to fresh scandals. Redwood Hospital prepared for Evelyn's delivery. She chose Dr. Alicia Brooks to oversee the birth, the same doctor whose name Scarlett had so cruelly misused. Through tears and laughter, Jonathan and Evelyn repainted the nursery together this time, in pastel yellows and soft greens. Hand in hand, they sorted through tiny clothes and plush toys. Each shared moment was a step toward mending the rift between them, though neither could forget the dark chapter they had endured. Whether their marriage would be stronger for it remained an open question, but at least they had a chance to build anew, and that was more than either of them had dared hope when the deception first unraveled. Evelyn went into labor on a crisp autumn morning. Jonathan rushed her to Redwood Hospital, heart pounding with excitement and trepidation. It felt surreal to think that not long ago he believed mother and child were lost forever. Now he was about to witness the miracle of his child's birth. He squeezed Evelyn's hand, murmuring words of encouragement. The labor lasted 14 intense hours. Dr. Alicia Brooks orchestrated a skilled team, carefully managing the placenta previa complication. Evelyn's mother hovered in the waiting room reciting prayers, while Jonathan stayed by Evelyn's side, wiping her brow and coaxing her with unwavering focus. Finally, at 3 in the morning, the baby's first cry pierced the air. A healthy baby girl, Rosalie Grace Davenport, entered the world. Overcome with emotion, Jonathan cut the umbilical cord himself, tears streaming down his face. Evelyn sobbed with relief and joy as the tiny, wrinkled infant was placed gently on her chest. In that tender, life-affirming moment, all the horrors of Scarlett's scheme felt distant. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the forged documents, they were overshadowed by the bright reality of a new life. Evelyn looked at Jonathan with a mixture of love and lingering sadness. "She's here," she whispered. Her words were a statement of triumph, an acknowledgement that despite everything, their child had arrived safely. Jonathan leaned down to kiss both mother and child, silent promises forming in his mind. Never again would he allow his family to be torn apart by lies or neglect. That night, as Rosalie slept in Evelyn's arms, Jonathan sat in a hospital chair, unable to take his eyes off them. He felt gratitude and guilt, hope and remorse, all swirling in his chest. But one feeling stood out above the rest, a fierce determination to be the partner and father they both deserved. Months turned into a year. Jonathan and Evelyn introduced Rosalie to the world with a small christening ceremony, attended by close friends and family. Photo frames of the newborn smiling, cooing, learning to crawl gradually replaced the tabloids' sensational images of the scandal. Jonathan maintained a scaled-back work schedule to devote more time to fatherhood. Late-night feedings, diaper changes, and lullabies became part of his daily existence. It was uncharted territory, but he embraced it wholeheartedly. He and Evelyn still carried scars from the betrayal. Sometimes a heated argument would flare up, triggered by unresolved trust issues. They kept returning to therapy, recognizing that healing was an ongoing process. Yet, every time Rosalie giggled or reached for them, it reminded both parents of what truly mattered. Slowly, bit by bit, they rebuilt a foundation of mutual respect, if not the unconditional trust they once took for granted. Scarlett's name occasionally resurfaced in media circles, referencing her incarceration or rumored appeals. None ever succeeded. George Eastman, too, served his reduced sentence, rumored to have spilled additional secrets that implicated other clients in separate forgeries. The world moved on, finding fresh scandals and stories to devour. For Evelyn, the greatest revelation was the depth of her own resilience. Surviving a fabricated death, discovering her husband's affair, confronting her betrayer in a wedding dress, these experiences had tested the very limits of her spirit. Yet she found within herself a fierce resolve to protect her child, to seek justice, and to strive for a future she could still believe in. Jonathan, humbled by his fall from grace, discovered a new sense of accountability. He learned the hard way that money and power could not shield him from the consequences of personal choices. Living in gratitude for Evelyn's survival and Rosalie's birth, he vowed to prioritize family above all else. And so they carried on, marred by heartbreak, but alive and growing. Their story, rife with tragedy and deception, evolved into one of second chances and new beginnings. And through it all, Rosalie's bright laughter reminded them that hope, once rekindled, could illuminate even the darkest shadows. Life rarely hands out neat endings, but Evelyn and Jonathan discovered that from devastation can emerge renewal. Their marriage, once riddled with betrayal and heartbreak, found a tenuous but precious footing where honesty, counseling, and a shared commitment to their daughter became the pillars of their future. Scarlett's forgery scandal served as a cautionary tale, proving that no deception is foolproof, and truth has a way of surfacing in the most dramatic fashion. If this story gripped you, if you felt your heart racing, your emotions twisting with every page, then share it far and wide. Let others witness the human cost of lies and the resilience born from confronting them. Comment with your thoughts on this gripping saga and subscribe for more dramatic real-life fiction that holds a mirror to our deepest passions, fears, and hopes. Your support helps keep these compelling stories alive. Thank you.